Okay, welcome back. In this part, we're going to look at how to go from this very flat color to doing our own highlights and shading, shadows for this guy. So let's leave him on the flat color for now. Let's add a new layer and we'll call this, I'm just going to move this up to the top of the stack here. I can delete this bump temp layer because now we've used it, so we don't need it anymore. I can go back to this layer and I'll call this shadow. Okay, so I need some way to paint in shadows. Now I could of course just select a darker green color like so and come in and just start manually painting in some shadows, which I would do, like so. This technique though is going to require a lot of painting and a lot of time, so I'm going to do something that's a bit quicker. I'm going to set this color to dark gray just to start off with. It really isn't that important what shade of dark grey you've got. Now I'm going to look at my ambient occlusion settings under projection masking. So I'm going to enable the mask preview, which should be nothing at the moment as we have nothing masked. Then I'm going to go down to ambient occlusion mask and I'm going to turn it on. Okay, now that will show me what's masked. So at the moment when I paint, I can't paint anything that's red. So if I just painted over this whole thing, I would just actually paint out the ambient occlusion for this guy. And if I turn the masking off, you'll get a better look at what that looks like. So you can see I've really started to paint in some shadows here. Now if we do this on the UV view, this is going to be even quicker. So let's nip over to the UV view. Just come here, R for radius, take a giant big paintbrush and paint over grey. And you'll see some shadows start to come in there. Now this will form the foundation of our ambient occlusion. So let's just get that all nice and painted. B to bake it down. Let's go into the ortho view and you'll see here that I've started to paint in some of that occlusion, so some of the shadowing. Okay, now if I bring that back to fully shaded, and turn off Mari's inner ambient occlusion, you'll see that it's not very heavy, the effect. Now we can obviously control that by adding a, if we go over to the layers, we can add some sort of levels to this to get darker or lighter shadows. So let's do that. So add a layer stack with some levels. Let's pop open the stack adjustment or the adjustment stack here. I'm just going to make that a bit bigger so we can see what's going on. Click levels and now I can come in and start making this lighter or darker depending on what I need. Okay, so I'm just going to darken it up a tad, and obviously you can play around with the midtones just to get the final look you're looking for, but for right now, for me, this is enough. So this will be my first layer of shadow. But if we take a look at our projection mask, so let's just click the preview, you'll see I haven't actually captured much shadow. Most of this is red. So now I can come back in and start tweaking what will be in shadow and what will not. So if I use a lesser value here, I'll get a bigger overall level of occlusion. So let's come in here and get this. So I've got quite a lot showing that's not bright red, and then I'm going to go back to the layers and I'm going to do another shadow layer. So I'll just call this shadow 02, and now I'm going to paint this out. So let's turn off the projection masking so we can get a better look at what we're doing. And again, turning off the masking doesn't invalidate the mask, it just means you can't see it. So let's come over here, make sure we're on our new layer. We are, and just come in and let's paint over. So that's given us another layer of shadowing. So let's bake that out. And we can just about see that on there. Let's go to our shader. There we go. And let's have a look at what difference that is when we turn it on and off. Now the problem is this is looking decidedly grey. So let's flick this to multiply. And let's flick this to multiply. Okay, that's going to look better for us for a shadowing situation. Now remember, we've got no ambient occlusion on this little guy at the moment, so without these two layers he looks very, very flat. And in order to see that, we'll go to a flat color here and you'll see there's kind of no definition on him anywhere. When we turn these two back on, now we're getting somewhere. Okay, so that gives us some shadowing, and in a normal circumstance I would then use this as a base and then come in and paint some of my own shadows on here too. Or shadows is probably the wrong word, it's more a darkening of skin, so around areas that would naturally get dirty, and that's just gives us a shortcut to use that ambient occlusion masking. Okay, so I'm quite happy with that, but now I'd also like to create some lighter areas. Now, if we create another layer, and I'm going to pop this one up to the top. Yes, I'm going to move this one up there, there we go, and I'll just call this light skin. And now I want to paint some lighter areas of highlights, which I can again use the ambient occlusion projection masking for. So let's flick on the mask preview, but this time let's invert it. So I'm going to paint highlights wherever there's not a dark red, so this is not a good situation for us. So let's come in and tweak this, and you'll notice that it's difficult to get this correct. So at the moment I'd be painting a highlight pretty much everywhere that wasn't occluded. So now I can use the mask curve and just come up and start masking out bigger areas. Okay, because I just want to get some highlights in here. Okay, so that about does it, and in this case I'm not going to multiply my highlights, so I'm actually going to select a green color. Wrong one, I want to pick a color, so this one. Then I'm going to make it lighter than that. Okay, and now I'm going to go into the UV view and paint. I'm going to turn the mask preview off. Okay, and I'm going to come in here just with a paintbrush and I'm going to paint out some highlights. Okay, now I'm going to clear that. I'm actually going to use a less opaque brush, so an opacity maybe of around 50%. There we go, and I just hold O to get that opacity in there. And let's come in and just paint out some highlights on the green. B to bake that down, and just paint some more highlights, making sure I'm only touching the green portion. And as you can see, I'm not being uber careful here. Just a bit more highlight there and a bit more here, and the more time you spend on this, obviously the better and nicer it's going to be, but I'm just kind of racing through it at the moment. Some highlights here for the fingers, there we go, and for these fingers also, there we go. So I'm just hitting B to bake that down. There's probably going to be a highlight at the back of the tail area, so B. And now I want to highlight this yellow color, so I'm going to select it. I'm going to come in with a much lighter color, and I'm just going to P for paintbrush, and I'm going to paint out some highlights on here. Not too many. Just bake that out. Maybe some on the belly. Bake it out, and down the tail area a little bit. And I'm just clicking to bake out some highlights. And there we go, that will probably do for my highlights. So let's go back to our ortho view. Okay, now I've got my highlights painted on there. And this is flat shaded at the moment. So if we go to layers and I turn off all the shadows and skin we've just painted, you'll see that's what the texture used to look like. And just by adding a few patches of shadow and light skin and dark skin, we get a much more realistic texture. Okay, so let's go back to full shading mode in Mari and see what we got. Okay, now we have this, which I'm quite liking. Let me just turn off these highlights and flick them back on. Okay, so I'm not really liking the highlight that happened there on the belly, but that's sort of easy enough to change. We can go into the UV view, and then I can create a mask, and then I can just paint out any highlights that I don't like in the mask. So let's go to black and white, black radius for the brush. Whoops. And I've actually changed channels. I've used a hotkey to change channels. Sorry about that. There we go. And making sure that I'm on the light skin and I'm on the mask, I can come in here, R for brush radius, turn that down, and just start painting out any highlights I wasn't too keen on. So that one, for instance. And I wasn't too keen on some of this highlighting around here, so I'm going to paint a bit of it out. There we go. And let's have a look at this now. Alright, so that's got rid of that highlight I didn't like on the belly, so that will be fine. Let's make sure we're on our shader. Okay, and that is this shader now with no ambient occlusion and no other shadowing on except which we've painted, which is exactly what we wanted. If I go down here, you'll see that Mari's ambient occlusion is off. Okay, if we turn Mari's ambient occlusion all the way up, obviously we're going to go darker now. Right, and now it's just a case of playing with the levels on these areas of light and dark skin. So again, I've got levels on this one. I'm going to put a levels on my shadow number 2. Let me just close that down. So adjustment, stack, and levels. And again, this is not going to be terribly interesting to watch, and it's one of those things that will require some tweaking. But let's just try dropping the brightness down so you can see there our occlusion darkens up a bit. Again, depending on what you're looking for. I think I have mine just a tad darker. And then I could come into my light skin also, and I can throw in a adjustment stack with levels on this. I could also tint the highlight at this point, but let's just make these highlights a little lighter. So you can see here I've got control now over the level of highlight, so that would be obviously too many. I can come in and make these a little bit more pronounced, and from here I could then use a hue, saturation and value to change the color of said highlights. You know, maybe I want a bit more of a two-tone effect, or just maybe a lighter, a little more yellow in the green. And let's just pin that. Let's look up here where the highlight is. So as you can see, as I change this now, I can actually change the color of the highlight. So I might go a bit more towards yellow, and then a bit of saturation in there, just a bit. And then obviously I can change the value scale to really make them kind of stand out, or even darken them down from here. But for me, the value will be fine at 1. Okay, maybe a little more towards reddish orange. And there we go. Let's have a look at that. That's looking a bit better. Okay, now I'm going to turn on a little bit of ambient occlusion in Mari, because we would have a bit generated by Maya, so be around there. And let's see how we're looking. Pretty good, really. Let's look at that on the flat shade. Looks nice. Okay, I'm pretty happy with this. Now, for the mouth, I would just literally take the inside of the mouth here, because we're not going to see much of it. So I would take the inside of the mouth, I would put a new layer in and just paint it red. So here's the gum line, for instance. I would just do the gum line a kind of very dark red. So let's just come in and paint this gum line out. And actually Control and Shift and C to clear any paint I've just put down, and let's go mouth. Okay, always better to work on a new layer. And you see I can't paint. No matter what I do, I cannot paint. And this is one problem with hiding your occlusion mask. It's the fact that if we go under projection and turn on the masking, you'll see why I can't paint on that. because it's not there. Or sorry, it's masked out. So we have to make sure we've got none of our masks turned on. So occasionally in Mari you might forget and leave a mask on, and then when you're painting something don't really realize why it's not painting. But if I look at this now with the mask off, you can see, and I believe this is the tongue, that I can now paint on it. So let's just go back and make sure we're on the mouth layer, and I'm going to grab the opacity to 100% or 1, and I'm just going to paint out the tongue a bright red. Now of course if you wanted to, you can spend a bit more time on this, give it a little texture like we did with the skin, give it a two-tone effect by either using a Perlin noise layer or just a texture that you've grabbed from the internet at some point, or indeed one you've shot yourself, even better. But I'm just making these gums and eyes kind of a dark red, just in case we ever get to see inside the mouth. And B, just to bake it down after painting. Okay, there we go. And now I'm looking at these eyes, and I'm not really liking the colour of them, to be honest with you. So if I go to the ortho view and have a look here, you can see the inside of the mouth now, where the tongue and the gums are, all this nice red colour. And obviously the teeth would need painting out as well. Let's find out why they are currently black. And there we go. So I need to paint out the teeth, which is all these pieces here. So I'm just going to select a bone-like colour for the teeth. There we go. And again, spend more time on it. But I don't want you to make you watch me paint every individual tooth. So. And these should have been bone coloured. I distinctly remember filling this patch in with this colour at some point, but obviously when we've been painting in some occlusion or something, we've painted over them. It's not really a huge issue. Okay. And those two up there are actually, these two pieces up here are actually the inside of the mouth, so they would be red. Okay, so let's just flick our colour onto the red we used for the gums and get those kind of reddish. There we go. And let's have a look. There we go. So now I can see the teeth and the mouth is bright red, and I probably again just use some sort of fractal noise pattern in there just to make sure that it had some texture to it. But for right now, that's absolutely fine. Okay, so I'm quite liking the look of this at the moment. Now I might make some small tweaks, but first, I'd really like to get this into Maya and do a quick test render. That will allow us to see more of what it looks like, when we actually come to render it, because as good as Mari's viewport is, there isn't really a substitute for a direct render. So in the next part, we'll do any finishing off that needs doing. I can see some tweaks I might make around the feet and also the eyes, which I mentioned earlier. We'll have a look at those because I'm not real happy with those, but I got a bit distracted with the mouth, so we'll have a look at the eyes. We'll have a look at how to export all these textures, because you need to export now a bump map, a spec map, and a color map, and then we'll look at how to combine all that lot in Maya to get a sort of basic test renders out, so you can see if you need to tweak any more. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next part. Cheers.